Hello and welcome back to another edition of ESPN Scrum Reset. Sam Bruce and Christy Doran coming to you from the newly named Kiss Cam studios. Thanks to Johnny Corbett for throwing that late one out last week. I think it's fitting, Christy, because, mate, we've got the new set today. We're going very much Fox footy on the couch style. More relaxed vibes, a bit more comfortable. Your early thoughts?
Yeah, I don't mind it. Lower to the ground, Brucey, but
Welcome to my world, yeah.
Stepping into that world right now. So it is good. It is more comfy. A bit of leather. Don't mind it.
Yeah, that's dangerous territory there. Mate, it's we've had a lot of dark days in this studio the last, I don't know, we've probably been in here 4 years now, I think. 5 or 6 doing this pod. But this week feels like a good news week for Australian rugby. Off the back of a win on Saturday, a good second half performance against Japan. The Michael Cheika news kind of all but being confirmed, which we've been building to for a few weeks, if not months, probably when you rehash the situation. And also, hot off the press this morning, Treyvon Pritchard confirmed re-signing with Australian Rugby following his brother with Rugby Australia and the Reds through to 2029. That is a great bit of business. We've given Rugby Australia a lot of curry over times, but that is a good bit of work, and hat tip to the Reds as well.
Serious hat tip. Just got off the phone to someone actually just then. I'm led to believe that he turned down more than $2 million at the Sydney Roosters on a 3-year deal to stay at Queensland. So he would have been earning more than $750,000 a season staying at the Reds. 19-year-old. You spoke to him at the start of the year, and he always gave the impression that he wanted to stay in rugby.
For sure. I said, this is the game I grew up playing, certainly through his teenage years. Love what the Reds were about, that he'd been in the system with the same kind of group of mates through that period. And the way he's been managed, I just said hat tip to Queensland before, but they have done everything right by this kid. Certainly from an outsider's perspective, that's the way it looks to me, how he's been managed coming through. We know the unfortunate injury, that horrible hip drop tackle that got him in the Under-20s World Championship. But he just seemed a very headstrong young man that, knew what he wanted and understood exactly who he is and where he wanted to go. So I think this is brilliant for the game and for Treyvon himself.
Yeah, it certainly is. To me, he reminds me of when James O'Connor came onto the scene. He was a 17-year-old at the Western Force, but James was a fullback winger who could play fly half, could play inside centre, and there's a lot of the same characteristics with Treyvon.
Maturity aside.
Well, absolutely, and James would be the first to admit
that now. Absolutely, yeah.
But what he can do on the footy field is pretty special. We've seen it at the 20s level for the under-20s Australian side, the junior Wallabies team. We saw glimpses of that with the Australian schoolboys at inside centre. We haven't seen that for the Reds, but in the years to come, we will. I think he'll be at fullback next year. Jock Campbell unlikely to be at the Reds yet. That hasn't been officially confirmed yet, but he's had the perfect initiation under Les Kiss, who has always had the ability to bring through young guys. He's given opportunities to that. We saw that on the weekend with the Wallabies. Not afraid of giving chances and asking the players to step up and deliver. But how Kissy managed him throughout the year, a lot coming off the bench, wearing that 23 jersey, 1 or 2 starts, one unfortunate where he got concussed early on. But he is someone who's very, very special. Good result for Australian rugby. His brother, Caden's staying at the Brumbies. So he's locked up to 2030, Treyvon to 2029. I dare say the Sevens LA Olympics is definitely something that he'll be targeting. He's a player, not just now, but certainly in the future.
And, a guy I think going forward, if he has a crack at rugby league, good luck to him. I think he'll excel in that sport as well. But you could see almost the way that they've done the Max Jorgensen contract, Rugby Australia, that may be where Treyvon, if he is to stay in rugby longer term, the next contract comes around, that there's a couple of sabbaticals in there. Go away to France or Japan, Treyvon, because, this is a kid who hasn't played a test yet, but could go on to play a lot of test matches for Australia.
Yeah, and how he's tracking with his injury, we'll see. There's always little hiccups along the way. But I would love to see if he's fully fit. I think Australia A in October might be too soon for him. But if he's back and he's knocking on the door, take him on that end of year tour as a development player. He's the sort of guy that would thrive in that environment. First kind of went through the doors of Ballymore at 15, and the impressions that he gave very early on was this guy has something a bit special, not just on the footy field, but with how he conducts himself as well. So, yeah, great piece of business, not just from the Reds, but Rugby Australia. He's got the top-up deal there that'll come into effect. He was already signed for 27, but to ensure that he didn't go to the NRL, and I think, PNG certainly were there, but the Roosters particularly with that massive offer, to have that top-up kickstart a year earlier. It's a 3-year deal essentially, but he was never going to go. He was locked and loaded from 27 anyway. So, yeah, good piece of business. And you're right, it's been a really good couple of weeks for Australian rugby.
Well done to all involved on that one. The Roosters, you mentioned them there. If there's any kind of NRL club that Australian rugby has I would say a workable, but a pretty good workable relationship in inverted commas, Christy, because they are different sports competing businesses, no doubt. But we are on the verge of seeing another Rooster, not just Mark Nwanganitawasi, but of course assistant coach Michael Cheika complete his return to Australian rugby with the Waratahs. We feel the deal is imminent. Johnny Drennan and Ian Payton in the SMH reporting yesterday, a 2-year deal is very nearing completion. Look, this has really kind of gone into overdrive, Christy, the last week or so, but we felt the moment that Dan McKellar kind of did part ways with the Waratahs shortly after the season concluded, that this was probably where it was going to land. There's been, it's taken time to get there, time for the conversations to happen, but they have. Where is it at in terms of what you're hearing, and where does it get done in the time frame?
Yeah, it's interesting because I was in New Zealand when I spoke to Cheik, so the middle of July, and at that point in time, he told me on the record in a story in the Oz that he hadn't had anyone reach out to him at Rugby Australia at that point in time, and it probably surprised a few people. Dan had gone a couple of weeks earlier. Surely you're going after a World Rugby Coach of the Year who's an Australian, who's literally in the same precinct as the Rugby Australia building, with the Roosters being there as well. But how that shifted, they got a lot of applicants, or they got some applicants. I think they asked for more applicants by the close of period, which is Friday a couple of weeks ago. And I think it dawned, the penny started to drop that, hey, we probably don't have the world-class coach that we wanted.
Yep.
I think they'd hoped that Joe Schmidt would potentially be there as a senior assistant or a consultant. It was made clear that he didn't want that. Scott Robertson similarly. So they started to lose a couple of those headline acts that they thought. And then I think it took Phil Wall almost reaching out to Cheik or vice versa, going, let's sort this out, catch up. They have done that. There's been a fair few players that have made their feelings clear around the fact that they wanted Cheik involved. Not just the Nick Phipps and the Bernard Foleys, but they certainly helped. It was actually rather hilarious that when I spoke to Cheik and I told him that Phipps and Foley were coming back, and he said, "What, really?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "They haven't come to me and asked if that's okay yet." And it's funny that a month later on, we're going to have Michael Cheika likely come back as the Tahs coach. So what I understand over the last week or so is Stephen Hoyles is likely to come back on Thursday from LA. He's been over there. A couple of key pieces of the puzzle have to get almost signed off to begin with. Cheik wants a couple of assistant coaches. I think the heir apparent is Steve Hoyles. But in addition to that, we all know that Cheik is someone who, in the past, it was certainly his way or the highway. I think there's still an element of that. He wants a bit of control. My understanding is a 1 year plus one. Now, it might be a 2 that went out there from the Waratahs, but I think Cheik wants a 1+1 at this point in time. So, yeah, I think whether or not this deal gets done over the next couple of days remains to be seen, but I think they're very optimistic that the deal will get struck. It's probably a matter of not if, but when.
So do you think in your mind, is that a bit of Cheik keeping his options open about, jumping back to the NRL or, another deal that might come up after the World Cup? Do you see this as a stepping stone to getting that elusive second crack at the Wallabies that we know he still craves deep down? Or is it simply, okay, I only want to be sort of in this position for one. If it's successful and we're going places, then I'll hang around and oversee this transitional period? Or what's your gut on maybe the 1+1?
I think it's a combination of all of it, because we've got to remember, I think there is a large element that people, and Cheik himself, thought that Steve Borthwick, there'd been so much noise around his future at England, and we know what Cheik did at Leicester. Impressed a lot of people, took Leicester from missing the finals with Dan McKellar to making the final at Twickenham in the space of a year. And so that led the RFU thinking, well, he might be the person, if Borthwick stumbles, to bring in at the last moment. So, even a couple of weeks ago, those noises were still very, very much around. Steve Borthwick, I think, will have to have a really good November to survive and go through to that World Cup in Australia, which obviously Michael Cheika knows very well too. So I think there is an element of keeping the cards completely open. His family's obviously in Sydney, a couple of his kids still in Sydney at school as well. So it aligns really, really well right now. It's a great piece of business if it gets done. You'll have to tip your hat to Phil Waugh if he does get it, because I don't think he was on the Michael Cheika band until recently, over the last few weeks, where that's really shifted that kind of thinking. And it's no surprise, because the Waratahs need people to come through the turnstiles, and they need to get back to being a genuine competitor in Super Rugby, and they have not been since maybe 2018, but certainly not really since the Michael Cheika days of 2013, 14, 15.
Yeah, well, I tweeted yesterday that immediately, you get the feeling when this deal is done that just whacks an extra 5K bums on seats at Allianz for their opening game next year. You add to that the Angus Crichton interest factor that, is cross-code. That'll bring a few more in. So you've probably gone from maybe, a 14,000, 15,000 crowd to hopefully getting up around 20K, depending what they do in the preseason and how that first 15 looks on match day. Is Bernard Foley going to be there as well? So, look, loads of interest around that. I guess, Christy, I think of a line from, it's actually an old Sky Sport New Zealand promo from a Bledisloe years ago, the one that Tim Morrison did, the Once Were Warriors actor. Everyone, if you haven't seen it, go and dig it out. It's fantastic on YouTube. And there's a line in there, you can keep the icing, brother. I want to taste the cake. Now, for me, the devil here is in the long-term succession plan for the Waratahs. And this can't be a sugar rush for New South Wales Rugby. It's great that Cheik's going to come back, in my mind, to hopefully set this team back on a course to the finals going forward. But what happens when he leaves the building then? What is the 4, 5, 6 year structural plan that keeps this franchise in the finals as it needs to be for the game to be successful here in Australia? Have the biggest player base, the biggest state in Super Rugby for Australia, miss the finals and finish below the other three is not good enough. Absolutely great for what the Reds and the Brumbies are making the finals and the Forces improvements this year, but the Waratahs need to be better than they are. That is an absolute must for Australian Rugby to be in a better position across the board. I want to see that longer term detail.
Yeah, and people hoped that would occur post-Cheik when Daryl Gibson took over, but I think people pretty quickly realised that Daryl Gibson wasn't really a head coach. Yep. Very, very good assistant coach, and they lost their way after that, didn't they? And the turnover of coaches and tens is something that everyone's bemoaned for some time, and we even heard Bernard Foley talk about it a couple of weeks ago, and Britt and I spoke about that on the pod 2 weeks back. But you bang on, you're correct there. The pleasing element to it is that Stephen Hoyles is a head coach. We know that, and the one person that he's told me that he would work under as a head coach is Cheik, and it's probably not a great surprise because Hoylesy played in that 2014 side, didn't he? Yeah. And then pretty quickly played in the 2015 season, and then he hung up the boots and moved into the coaching realm. And he's a guy that knows not just Sydney Club Rugby very well, has been down at the Brumbies, captained that side. He's the sort of person that understands Sydney Club Rugby, and I think that they won't be so, the fact that they've coached in the competition recently, I think there was a few people surprised that Dan McKellar didn't tap into the resources in the local competitions enough. That's something that I think Hoylesy would do quite well. Some coaches think they might know everything, and other coaches don't want to hear that sort of stuff, but I think that's a really important point you make. The other point that I would like to make just at the moment is like, this is what the Waratahs needs to do better. At the moment, all of them have been training. Like the Waratahs have been training daily at Daceyville, yet it means that they can't actually go back to their clubs and play and train for the Shoot Shield clubs from a week-to-week basis. So on Tuesday nights, often the players, because they train already with the Tahs throughout the day, they're not allowed to then go train with their Shoot Shield clubs.
Sure.
Like that's just ridiculous over the last 6 weeks when they haven't played any footy to be just getting slogged, ahead of a 3-4 match kind of Super Rugby Oz competition. So if you want to bring a bit more alignment, bring back some fans, get a stronger connection with the Shoot Shield clubs, they should be in there on a Tuesday night and a Thursday night, so that they're playing with their contemporaries, right, from a Shoot Shield perspective. So it's just a simple thing that someone like a Hoylesy, who has spent years at Randwick, I think would be a nice kind of connection point and something that Phil Ward's been talking about for years since he took over at Rugby Australia.
Yeah, joining the dots, that's right. Obviously, as you mentioned there, Randwick is the common denominator there between Hoylesy and Cheik. Obviously, Hoylesy played under Cheik there in those last couple of seasons when he came back from that debilitating foot injury. Hoylesy also understands the media. He's worked within it previously as well. So it feels like a good fit there. And yeah, I think this is, if it comes to fruition, we're not over the line yet, but if all signs suggesting that this is the route that has been taken, then it feels like a good fit given those other candidates that you mentioned that went away. Some others probably just lack the profile of Cheik from a broader rugby ecosystem, if you like, all the things we've spoken about just then. So yeah, look, we'll wait for the contracts to be signed and everything to happen, but it feels that this is a real, or could be, I won't say is because we've had a lot of these false dawns in New South Wales rugby in particular, has the ability to hopefully be a turning point for this franchise.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And I think it will be. I think it'll be a good... I like the idea of having the two in there, that you need to have a strong assistant coaching group along with a head coach to have that...
How many Randwick men can you get at coaching?
We'll see about that. I'm sure there's one or two more around the corner. But, the other point, and playing devil's advocate just for a hot second, like speaking to guys like, John Connolly, he goes, well, if Hoylesy's the man, why can't he just coach now? Like, well, why do you need to potentially have someone like, does he need someone like a Cheik to oversee him at the moment? And to me, I actually think he is perfect to come back with that aura that he offers. We can't understate, if it wasn't a 2027 World Cup year and it was halfway through a World Cup cycle, I could understand just giving Hoylesy the keys straight away.
Agreed.
But I actually think it's a really good, smart move in a World Cup year too, particularly when you've got someone like Angus Crichton transitioning from the Roosters as well. It's been a long time since he was at rugby, playing rugby, who understand Cheik, and even Suwali. Like, he spent that year in 2020 working with Cheik then as well. So it's another person. We know Max Jorgensen spent a bit of time there training too. So there's a lot of people that will know Cheik, not just the Phipps and Foleys. And I'm fascinated to see Suwali. Like, does he stay in the midfield or does he go back to fullback? Because whenever I've spoken to Michael, he's always seen him as a fullback and thinks that he can unlock him in the same way that Israel Folau was unlocked under Cheik too. So, yeah, really interesting times, but I think it's much welcomed news.
Indeed. Watch this space for that contract being signed, sealed and delivered whenever it may land. Okay, let's go to the Wallabies' victory over Japan on Saturday afternoon in Townsville. A bit of afternoon rugby, some cracking rugby played across the 80 minutes. Australia winning 56-17. I think it was 45 unanswered points. Vital score just before halftime. Taniela Tupou's second try. And that kind of really gave them a bit of momentum, Christy, going into the sheds, because I actually thought Japan played some sparkling rugby in that first half. Australia certainly didn't help themselves defensively and with some of their game management. But the second half was all Australia. And the thing that stood out for me, outside of the management, and Les Kiss spoke post-match around some of the changes that they did make at halftime around backs running too much, need to get in behind the forwards. Forwards need to carry a bit more, get their contestable kicking right, as they did. But it was a perfect kind of example of the power of good discipline and winning your breakdown, because the ease at which the Wallabies were able to get up into Japanese territory, from those turnovers that Carlo Tizzano made, was it 3 or 4 in the end? Pioneer Ramosa, Fraser coming on late, kicking downfield, building from there, and then when you get that close to the try line in the game, the way it's refereed at the moment, where defences have to be behind the line, you're almost guaranteed to score from close range. I mean, the Wallabies butchered a couple there with drop balls over the line, but the fact that there was multiple front rowers scoring, it was just, underline how, a successful territory game can be played with good discipline and then capitalising on your 22 entries.
Yeah, they were very, very good, particularly in that second half. And how good was the work there from the Wallabies jacklers? You mentioned Carlo Tizzano. I think it was 3, he had 2 in a 10-minute period. You had Aiden Ross have a clean turnover. You mentioned BPA, Jeremy Williams got on the ball as well. So it was a collective effort, and that's the most pleasing element of it. Like, you think back in the day, probably only 5 or 6 years ago, it was really only 1 or 2 that were going hard on the ball at that time. Michael Hooper might, or David Pocock, who was probably more successful and efficient in that area. But now there's, Josh Nasser often goes on the ball as well, and it's that is the modern way of footy. You see the All Blacks do it all the time, the Springboks. The best sides have on-ball threats right across the field. So Japan they threw a few shots still in that second half, but they started to be disconnected. Yep. Their trackers just were too slow, and Tizzano given him an inch, and he's taken it for a mile. So really pleasing element. Beyond the actual game, and we'll pick it apart a bit more, because how good was Isaac Henry? But we'll talk about the selection headaches too. But I love the fact that even before the game started, Les Kiss decided, no, we are testing our depth and we are giving opportunities to players, because we saw in November how conservative Joe Schmidt was with his selection, how conservative he was with the bench integration. And Les Kiss brought on troops early in that second half. He made massive wholesale changes where people were a bit concerned, like, is this too many? And I think they all just did their job really, really well. So that, to me, before even a game and the ball had been kicked off, I liked the ambition that was showed from Les Kiss and the faith, and that was definitely shown and followed through by the playing group. But yeah, they were a bit slow, even on the line. Like, there was one or 2 moments where, the quick tap from Saito, the 9, and
well taken.
It just catches the Wallabies napping there a little bit. That's an area that they've got to have to improve, but defensively. But I thought what they showed in attack was really encouraging, and having that 10, 12, 13 axis at the Reds, the combination there showed, and certainly Isaac Henry looks at 27 comfortable as a Wallaby, doesn't he?
Yeah, you want to say late bloomer, but it's probably not a fault of his own, because he has had that horrid run with injuries we've mentioned on this podcast a number of times. I mean, I think we even threw him out as a Wallaby last year in a couple of appearances we did see late in the season. This year, he managed to string consecutive games together and just looks a natural midfielder, doesn't he? Putting the Suoliti conversation aside for the moment, his ability to straighten and his power through contact, it just looked like a natural centre for a change. Comfortable at both 12 and 13, and suddenly, I know you've mentioned it again last week, Samu Karevi, he's more in that mould of a Karevi, isn't he? He's got an offload. He's, wouldn't say stocky, he's a big chunky guy, isn't he? And can really give you that front foot ball. And we saw that from the outset, and just what he did for the Wallabies attack to get it going forward, get it on the front foot, I just thought was a real change. And that was my headline takeaway from the game on Saturday night, just how he's going to, I wrote muddy the midfield mix. Whether we see, a move for Joseph over the next couple of weeks, who knows? We made a big point of that. We don't need to rehash it. But I just think it's great that we've seen Isaac Henry at test level, and I'm hopeful we see a bit more of him yet.
Well, if you look at the first 2 tries that the Wallabies score, it comes off the back of damaging runs from Henry through the midfield. And it wasn't necessarily clear-cut runs where he makes 30, 40 metres, but it was getting well over the gain line and making that 10 to 15 metres, which just has the defensive line at 6s and 7s after that. So he made his inroads early, which is always a pleasing thing. You talk about the lines that he was running, like the no try, the forward pass from Hunter Paisami on about the half-hour mark was just perfect from Henry, because he's running at an angle at about 1 1 o'clock, and it looks like he's going to go on Riley's outside. And then just as Paisami's about to start to double pump, he changes it to an 11 o'clock angle, and he just skins, bamboozles Riley, goes straight through. It's a shame that it was a forward pass, but that just showed the smarts of a rugby player, that you can think on the run and you can change your line halfway through a motion. So he looks like, as you said, a proper footy player, and that's the thing that I think will leave Les Kiss thinking maybe this is worth experimenting a little bit more. We've got to remember Lenny Kitau's coming back. He's going to be fit for this Argentina tour. First game is in a week and a half. They are naming their squad on Wednesday for that, which you had said off air that they would, and that's been confirmed that it will happen. It's a really it's a battle now, isn't it? It's a competitive.
It's that competitive
space.
pressure. That was the words that Les Kiss used post game on Saturday, and he's been asked about Joseph on a number of occasions now. But just great to have another name, another body in that mix, and you said it before around some new faces for this couple of games against Japan. The fact that he's been able to give Len some time off to get that ankle right, and now he comes back as the reigning John Eales medalist, as a truly world-class midfielder, and suddenly you're thinking, geez, this is a nice position to be in.
Yeah, you bang on, and it's not just Ikitau, Suwali, Josh Fluke is in and around. What happens with Paisami will be fascinating, because he's going up to Japan, and ideally you keep him in Queensland for 27 to allow for those combinations to get better. We know Izzy Parisi's coming back, and when we see him remains to be seen. I don't think we'll see him in Argentina just yet, because I think Paisami's staying around. Ikitau's back. You can't take everyone, can you? So, but I still would love to see Ikitau at 13. I think he's a better 13. From what I've been told, he wants to play 13, even though publicly he'll come out and say he doesn't really mind. But he is a 13. I don't think he has the passing game yet to be at 12. He's effective close to the 22 with how the Joe Schmidt style of play was being played, with lots of pick and goes and ball retention. But the Kiss era has a bit more desire to play with some width and bring in the outside backs, and we've seen that. Carter Gordon's perfect for that, because he likes throwing the off, the cut-out pass, and it's encouraging signs. I think you'll absolutely see Swaley feature on the wing at some stage over the next month or so, and maybe it starts with Argentina. Jorgensen had a good game, didn't he? Got run down once or twice, which maybe people were surprised by, but what he did in the air there kick-started the Wallabies second half, when he climbed over the top and then ran 30 metres to get the Wallabies right on the front foot. So, yeah, is Harry Potter under a bit of pressure? He certainly is. He's probably the one who's most vulnerable there. But even Tom Wright had a couple of good touches himself.
That's the backs. The forwards. Taniela Tupou's best game, I don't know, maybe not ever in a Wallabies jersey, but certainly I think in the last 3 or 4 years.
Maybe as a starter, best game.
Probably as a starter, I think you're right there. Not just the 2 tries. We know how damaging he is close to the line, but there was a moment, there was a break, I think sort of maybe 10 or 15 minutes in, and he was one of 3 guys who was up in support there. Now, we haven't always seen that with Nella, and we know everything that went on at the Waratahs last year when he spoke, that great interview with Johnny Drennan in the Herald. Do I even want to play rugby? Am I actually good at this game? The questions that he was having on the inside, him personally as a rugby player, to the performance he delivered the other night. The set piece has always been there, and great to see that pushover try in the second half when he was actually off the field. But that was as good a kind of 45, 50-minute performance as you'll see from Nella. And you just want to see that, week in, week out. Whether, he's ever going to start some more when Alan is not having the week off. But it feels like, the move to France for Nella has been hugely beneficial.
How about that highlights reel in the opening 20 minutes? He would have had a scrum penalty, a try, the kick on the outside of the boot, which
Beautiful.
almost set up nicely for Harry Potter. He's a player and a half, isn't he? And I love the fact that he started 20 minutes or so up in Osaka, but I would be starting him over Alan Alatoa at the moment. I know that there was a trend with the Springboks of maybe having their more powerful scrum in the second half, but someone like Anella is just so damaging. What we saw, what he delivers, is exceptional when he's got his mojo, and he's got it. He's rediscovered it, absolutely. It probably goes to show of the turbulent nature of him moving across Super Rugby wasn't working. No. And that's maybe a shortcoming of whatever happened at the Tahs, but even Dan McKellar there.
And the broader turmoil in Australian rugby across that period.
I think that's the bigger point, rather than being, because he was there with Angus Bell guys that he really gets along with, doesn't he? But he seems like he's in a happy place. It's good news that he's staying around. Like, they weren't sure about it for a little while because of the different international window this year.
Yeah, well, I did a deep dive on that earlier in the year into the real weeds of the World Rugby regulations around the Rugby Championship window and then the non-championship window and the 6 or 8 weeks, or how does it extend here and there, and worked out that, he was probably going to be good up until the Springboks. Now, obviously, there's a part of him that wants to manage the relationship with Russing as well, and that, from a broader Rugby Australia perspective, feels like across the board is in a better space now than it was when you think back to the spring tour of Dave Rennie's last spring tour with Japan and everything. So that has improved. But the fact that he is in this space and he will be here through till the Springboks. Sadly missed the Bledisloes. Will Skelton would have been in the same boat. He's obviously out with an Achilles. And Tom Hooper's obviously the other one who's signed to Exeter we probably won't see as well. So, look, a shame about that, but the fact that 2 tests in Argentina and the Springboks game is pretty good. Yeah,
and they really need to kick on against Argentina. Probably like bringing the Japan game to a wrap. It was great to see guys like Charlie Cale get an opportunity too, how effective he is at the line-out with the pressure that he can put on there, with how quick and electric he is. I love seeing him in that last 30 particularly. A bit more space out wide, and he becomes like that Henry Pollock figure who can really cause opposition's damages at that point. Look, he wasn't the only one. Like Fraser McWright making an impact off the bench. We've already talked about Tiziano. Jeremy Williams continues to do the business, doesn't he? We do have to put it in the realm that it's Japan,
absolutely,
who are world number 12, don't we? So. Great that there's been 3 great wins, but they haven't actually beaten a top 9 side since Argentina in Townsville, which was 11 months ago. So this next couple of weeks is going to be crucial for the Wallabies to kick on, find some momentum, leapfrog, go above Argentina in the World Rugby standings.
Yep.
That's really important to try to unlock some millions from a broadcast perspective, because they need to be in that top 4 or 5 for that to start to get unlocked.
Indeed. Maybe just a quick one on Massimo DeLutis, the 1,000th Wallaby. I mean, you couldn't have written the script any better, could you? Coming on, throwing a pass that created the break for Carter Gordon and following up and getting the pop ball from Jeremy Williams. Short range, over the line, try on the line. As I said, script writers, you can't get it any better than that.
He was chuffed, wasn't he? But wasn't it fantastic to see how elated he was? Yep. And he's had an injury disrupted couple of years himself, but he's a fine player, and I still distinctly remember watching him for the first time when he crushed, I think it was the Irish under-20 side, which had Sam Prendergast. And when he was on the field, the junior Wallabies were going well, and as soon as he went off, they absolutely crumbled. And he's that sort of player, generational player. 22, we know the bench press records. He's now Wallaby 1,000. You hope and expect that he will continue to kick on. But I think it's great that he got an opportunity as well. It's more pressure. So Nongor's now going to have to elevate his game as well. Alan Alatoa was elated in the bench, sitting in the stands, seeing him cross. So good signs.
Indeed. I'm not sure what the crowd was up there on Saturday afternoon.
19,000, I think.
Well, for Japan, coming up against, I assume there was afternoon rugby. Let me know if I was a general buy or something on in Townsville that weekend for the rugby clubs. But under the sun, they've signed a longer-term deal now, 3 tests up there through to about 29 or 2030. I think Argentina a couple of times and maybe Georgia as well. So, look, that is becoming a bit of a rugby venue of note.
Yeah, it is. And, another couple of test matches over the next few years, which is good. Queensland government money, that one is. So it's very much a state government play to get more money there. Good that the coffers start to get more fuel because of that.
And they want to make use of that stadium, don't they? Because they really only got the Cowboys are up there. I'm not sure if I haven't seen the Socceroos have gone there. Maybe the Tillies have gone there.
I think they have, yeah.
So they are obviously keen to bring big events to the city. No-brainer for Rugby Australia.
And it My understanding is that's what helps get the Anzac tests across the line in Queensland is the government money there, which was part of a bigger play for big sporting events in North Queensland and Queensland at large.
Very nice. As we mentioned, stay tuned for that Wallabies squad, probably Wednesday lunchtime, early afternoon, potentially. Could be a couple of surprise names in there, but I think as they're sitting down right now, as we said, there's the competitive pressure there, and there will be some genuine debates, probably across the board.
Yeah, well, I heard
35, 36, probably a bit around in number.
Yeah, you'd expect that. I heard Jock Campbell and Suwali both got little soft tissue injuries last week at training. I know that it was said it was at the game. Look, I don't think that was necessarily the case. But are both of those guys going to be all right? Hopefully they are. Jordy Pataia was certainly getting inquired around the Argentina matches and his health and how he'd be going. So he'll be in the frame. But off the back of Isaac Henry's performance, is there a position there for Pataia? I'm not sure if there is. There might be if Jock Campbell is indeed out. But, yeah, really exciting around. You're going to be able to talk about a Wallaby side that's going for 4 straight for the first time since must be 2021 when Dave Rennie's side went on a bit of a run there. So, yeah, lots doing.
Yeah, those tests, I think 5 a.m. Is the first one Sunday week, and then a slightly more friendly at 7 a.m., but I'm sure probably you and I, mate, will be up 5 a.m. regardless, if not for work, then because of our sons. Right, Walaroos this weekend against the Black Ferns, the return O'Reilly Cup match. We remember the Anzac Day game between the two of the tests at Sunshine Coast Stadium. Look, it's all come together a little bit for the Wallaroos after a long period of uncertainty and Rugby Australia getting its ducks in a row. There's a great piece on ESPN from Brittany Mitchell kind of canvassing the last 12 months and the disappointing nature of it taking that long to come to fruition. But Tim Walsh, obviously, in the high-performance role. They announced Sione Fuka last week amid more than a touch of controversy. Christy coming home from Scotland, the release there, the timings around this and that. But anyway, it's been done. Rugby Australia will pay Scotland Rugby a release fee, but he won't start his role until 2027, which is unfortunate. In the meantime, a stopgap coaching team with Tim Walsh kind of overseeing it for the meantime. Who's heading that up? Just remind me.
Yeah, Mike
Ruthven,
yeah,
thank you.
And Benny Moen
Benny
involved.
Moen's on the team as well.
Reg
so
Taylor.
The Wallaroos flew out on Saturday, I think it was. They've got this game. Look, they'll be up against it, as we know, against the Black Ferns. But the big name on the team sheet was Madison Levi. Great to see her going to try her hand at Rugby 15s. We know her sister's been playing for the Titans in NRLW. But this feels like a situation, we haven't seen the team list for this week. It'll probably come out Thursday, that you're not going to include Maddie in a touring squad and not play her. So either on the wing or on the bench. I, for one, hope we see it. And it just, as we're talking about extra eyeballs that certain decisions can impact, this feels like all of a sudden, I'd love to see Maddie Levi have a crack at 15s and see how she goes.
Yeah, and where, like they've got the Jazzy Millers who are classy operators in their own right. So there's going to be more...
Maya Stewart on the other wing, yeah.
Totally. So more competitive tension there. She's not the only 7-star that's in there with the Bien Taritas of the world. So, yeah, it's good. I think there'll be trust between them all now because Tim Walsh and Maddie Levi go back now a number of years, so they know each other better than most.
And the relationship, Christy, previously between the 7s and the 15s in Australian women's rugby hasn't always been that flash.
No, it hasn't. And this would likely help. And this has been on the cards for a little while as well. So everyone's had time to get their heads around it. We know more national contracts are coming in terms of the structural changes that are taking place in the women's rugby there. So, yeah, good signs. 100th test, really big one. New Zealand certainly favourites. They've won 30 straight, I think it is. So it's an opportunity once again to start to hopefully close the gap. But yeah, they are coming from a little while back, and this late nature of scrambling the coaches together hasn't helped. But at least it's a reasonable coaching team right now. Just
on Sione Fukafuka's appointment, look, I mentioned controversy. Scotland used the term surprised by how quickly Sione had found a new role. It all feels very convenient. And look, it's not the end of the world. We see, coaches leave contracts all the time, players leave contracts all the time in all sports. So maybe just a slightly unsavoury feeling between Scotland and Australia at this point. But a guy who was previously a Walaroos assistant went away and took the US job, had a win over the Wallaroos in Melbourne here, I think 2024, with that team over Australia. And then the Wallaroos managed to not reverse, they drew with them in the quarterfinals last year, didn't they? But advanced to the quarters of the World Cup from their pool match on a result as a result of a better for and against. So look, he's a guy who has done the rounds a little bit in women's rugby and feels like a good fit.
Yeah, it probably is, and I'll use trust as well because Sione and Tim Walsh have a relationship, so that might help in terms of aligned programs and everyone singing from the same hymn sheet. But at the end of the day, he's also got a winning percentage of 26% from his time as head coach of the US and of Scotland. Like, that's not a great record, is it? I don't think Scotland were great throughout the Six Nations earlier in the year. The US weren't flash either at last year's World Cup, so. Yeah, there is a huge question mark still around. Is this the right person? But there are enough people in the Rugby Australia building that like him, that are backing him. So fingers crossed, it all works out well. But I think a healthy amount of scepticism is not a bad thing. But it's interesting that they think he's the right guy now, but they didn't necessarily think he was the right guy a year ago when this is all taking place with his transition to Scotland. So, yeah, I would have loved to have seen Mike Rutherford get a crack potentially off the back of some really successful campaigns with New South Wales, but he's going to bide his time. He's an assistant there for now, and yeah, it'll be a really interesting game this weekend.
Yeah, I assume 5 o'clock kick-off, or is it earlier in the day? Check your Stan Sport guide for that one here in Australia anyway. On New Zealand, a quick touch on, obviously we're a few days out now from the All Blacks and Springboks, the opening test of rugby's greatest rivalry. The series so far, Christy, from a broader perspective, look, the crowds haven't been flash. The Stormers took it up to the All Blacks in their first hit out. Since then, they've whipped the Sharks last week, as we mentioned. Also a pretty convincing win over the Bulls on the weekend. The stadium's sort of half full for those. Has it maybe not captured South Africa like we thought it would, at least in the build-up? It's not quite a Lions series build-up where you've got so many, 20, 30,000 tourists by the time the tests come around. I'm not sure how many New Zealanders have travelled for these opening games so far, certainly not many. But maybe not delivered on the tour build-up front just yet.
It's surprised a lot of people, hasn't it? And even yesterday, I got a couple of calls, people saying that they were surprised by that. That's millions that's being left on the table because they haven't been able to get the stadiums full. Like, it was absolutely hosing it down in Durban for that Sharks contest. But the fact that even Marnona was in it, and it was a poultry crowd, to be honest. That does surprise. We know that the test matches are going to be bangers. They're going to be full. It starts this weekend. So that's very, very exciting. But it has been surprising, particularly off the back of the Lions, a handful of years ago, which were played behind closed doors. Yeah. Really interesting.
I wonder what it does for the 2030 return tour, South Africa to New Zealand, whether there's a little bit of a shift in thinking around structure. That'll all be revealed much closer too. But just the fact that it maybe hasn't quite hit its KPIs where they needed to be from a broadcast perspective, from a bums on seats in stadiums perspective. I'm sure there'll be a complete review from South Africa Rugby, and that'll be shared with New Zealand, no doubt, going forward. But maybe Australia and Argentina just sitting back now going, not hating seeing half full stadiums here.
Look, let's wait and see until the end of the test series, because I think it would be that'll capture everyone's imagination. Like, you look at reporters from England have come down to tour to cover that the greatest rivalry as well. So maybe it's just the calm before the storm. But you're right. I think the reports will be extensive, and New Zealand will be looking at it. And what you don't want is what we saw with the Lions series last year, where your super sides, your provincial sides are missing half their teams because they're getting prepared. The coaches are scared of losing them. Your depth being derailed. So that's the issue with these long tours at the moment, is whether or not coaches are prepared to lose a player or two for the greater good, perhaps.
And can they be, really hugely successful on that build up front in the professional era? That's the question. When these other teams, as you say, no big Springbok stars there because they're preparing for the Test series. These franchises have also got full URC seasons coming up, so they're very much in the pre-season. So a couple of variables there different from 1996, I think it was, when the All Blacks were there, completely different. World Rugby environment at the time. We forecasted last week. Richie Mo'unga's call-up completed, I think it was Friday last week. Dave Rennie indicating that he won't be a part of this first test. Likely the Lions tour match, which is between the first and second tests. How he goes that front, and I guess how Ruben Love goes in that first test this weekend, you expect him to be an he's certainty at number 10, given 3 from 3 and how he played across July. But just a fascinating, another addition to this series that may just help kick it up a notch as well.
Yeah, and there's question marks over a couple of players like Cam Roigard and Damien McKenzie about their fitness as well, whether or not they'll be right for the first test too. So, yeah, all eyes on Ruben Love. I hope he shoots the lights out. He's a really good player, isn't he? And he's made every post a winner so far this year. But in terms of internal pressure, we've been talking about it from a Wallabies perspective. Well, there's no bigger pressure than taking on the box with Richie Mo'unga sitting in the stands and biding his time. So, yeah, it'll be an intriguing test selection for both lineups this week.
We might try and drag Liam Napier away from a few Castle Lagers next Monday, given we won't actually have any Wallabies action this weekend. So, tee that one up. Mate, anything else to mention before we wrap up this week?
Shoot Shield finals coming up. I presume the same with Hospital Cup.
Yep.
So, yeah, plenty of footy around the corner still, despite the fact that the Wallabies aren't playing. But, yeah, the Walaroos as well. So, look forward to this one. Indeed.
Watch that Czech news, as we said, could be this week, could be next. Hopefully things falling into place for the Waratahs on that front. Treyvon Pritchard, great bit of business, as we mentioned as well, mate. Things looking up. It's been a very happy, warm, fuzzy feeling in here today.
Not so warm that you've taken your jumper off just yet, but you're
got a
right.
bit of a cough, mate. It's hard yakka in the Bruce household at the moment. We might have a bit of road conjunctivitis just come up this morning. So
thanks.
Good
to be sharing the couch with you in that case. Cheers,
mate. Hopefully you don't have it next week when we're back. Until then, team, enjoy what rugby you do get around. Whether you get up for the All Blacks box on Saturday night or just take in the Walaroos, maybe some club footy on Saturday afternoon. Until then, cheers. Enjoy it. See you Monday.